People who have seen something they could never explain. What was the thing? Story 1. Shortly after my mother passed away, I was going through and organizing her belongings in her room. I was talking out loud as if I were talking to her. There were some boxes with family photo albums I'd been looking for that I hadn't been able to find, and it was really worrying me. I was sitting on the floor and said aloud, "Where did you leave those albums, Mom?" Very slowly, her closet door opened on its own. A slow, creaking movement from nearly totally closed to halfway open. I was as terrified as I'd ever been in my life. I froze and didn't move, but I looked at exactly eye level, and there was a cardboard box labeled albums in my mother's handwriting on the lower shelf of the closet. I am not a religious or even spiritual person, and I thought that there might be some imbalance in the hanging of the closet door. I went back to the door many times and tested it by wiggling it back and forth and leaving it in different positions, but it's never moved that way since. Story 2. I had to clean out my late mother's house last year, and as much as that would have freaked me out, I'm a little jealous. There were so many questions I wanted to ask her. And while it had been a few months since she'd passed, her death was unexpected, so I was still kind of in a state of shock where it was very hard to believe she was gone. So the whole time, it was like, I cannot believe I can't just ask her about this. The whole I'll never be able to talk to my mom again was still very hard to believe. I would have given anything to be able to ask her questions about stuff we found, especially photos or mementos. I'm sorry for your loss, but glad your mom still helped you out from the great beyond. Shortly after my mom died, my SIL asked my husband to go to her house and disconnect her modem, which was in the room where she died. Husband was in that room, kneeling down to disconnect it, and it had just rained a ton, so her sump pump kicked on in the basement, and he heard what he thought was a very quiet moaning before he realized what it was. Said he near pissed himself and ran. Story 3. My maternal grandmother passed away February of 2022. She was 99 years old. My mom was super sad and heartbroken. I always shared a good bond with my grandma. I got to visit her and spend her birthday with her in December 2021. She had taken a big fall in some previous months and was bedridden, and she went downhill from there. She started reliving her youth and confusing people. Somehow, she recognized me the moment she saw me. She confused me once with my older sister, but that was it. Anyways, a few days after she passed, she came to me in a dream. It was one of those vivid, full-color dreams. She was in a white room full of light, surrounded by the sounds of chirping birds. I felt so much peace being there. Then she appeared and told me she was okay and to not worry about her. After that dream, I have no question about it that she's in heaven. She's at peace. It wasn't a creepy, unexplainable situation, but it was a great dream. She seems to know when I'm struggling. She likes to come to visit to cheer me up. Sometimes it's in dreams, other times it's just signals. I'm glad to know she's always keeping an eye on me. Story 4. I got pregnant the month after my husband's grandfather passed away. It was our first baby, and it had taken a while to conceive. This was also the first grandchild on both sides of the family. We were naming the baby after my husband's grandfather, but his middle name. It's a common first name, but not usually a middle name. It was also akin to a lot of references, so we ended up doing the nursery a specific theme. I need to mention that my husband's grandfather loved Fleetwood Mac. This was something he and I shared. One day while I'm in the nursery, later in the pregnancy, I have the radio playing from my phone. I was either putting up some stuff on the wall, which had belonged to Grandpa as well because his living room was nautical themed, or putting something together. It was about 4 to 5 p.m. and I was home by myself at the time. I was listening to our local classic rock station, and all of a sudden, the song cuts to the middle of Gold Dust Woman by Fleetwood Mac. After about 15 to 20 seconds, it went back to the other song. I was absolutely intrigued. So I messaged the radio station via Facebook and asked if there was some kind of glitch during the song and if that meant that Gold Dust Woman was on their playlist coming up. They had no idea what I meant. The crew had no indication of the other song being disrupted, and since it was 2 for Tuesday, their upcoming song was another song by the same band. If I had been using a regular radio, I'd have just assumed interference. But this was crystal clear and a very specific part of the song. First thing I did after was text my mother-in-law. She loves paranormal stuff, and she was all over it. I'll never know what that strange incident was, but the fact that it involved Fleetwood Mac makes me wonder. Story 5. When my dad passed away, he owned several TVs, which he placed in rooms through the house. Nobody in the immediate family needed a TV, so I promised these to others I knew. The only issue was, I could not locate any of the remotes. I went back to the house several times to look for them. Then, I went into the house another time, almost having given up, and in a very prominent location, where your eyes first go to, were all the remotes in a neat arrangement. Definitely did not miss this on all my other visits. Story 6. Not long after my dad died, I was in his study looking for the title to his car so I could transfer it into my name. I looked in several places where I knew he stored documents, but it wasn't in any of those. I said, "Okay, Dad, where did you put the title to the car?" Within about 30 seconds, I was kind of drawn to a box on the couch. He had a lot of boxes on the couch. This was just one of those, not labeled or anything that made it stand out from any of the others. I went over and opened the box. Inside were a lot of manila folders. Right toward the front was a folder labeled with the make and model of the car. I took out that folder, opened it, and the first thing in it was the title. Story 7. In my early 20s, I was home alone. I woke up to my cell phone ringing but missed the call. The number I missed the call from was my landline home phone number. I got up and found the cordless phone on the kitchen counter. I looked everywhere, but no one was in the house and the doors were all locked. Story 8. My husband got into an argument with a very confused, grumpy old man once. My husband was in the shower and put his phone on charge. When he got out, he had 3 missed calls. Assuming it was someone that knew him, he called it back. "Husband, hi, who's this? I missed 3 calls from you." "Old man, why are you asking me who I am?" "You called me." "No, you called me 3 times. No, I see right here, you called me 4 times now." "Who is this?" Realized what happened, a spoof, apologized and politely got off the call. I can only imagine some disgruntled call center employee was in a bad mood and just wanted to screw with people that day. Story 9. One time when I was like 16, I got a call from my dad asking if I was okay and if I were in trouble. I told him I was fine, but asked what he meant, and he told me he'd just gotten a strange call. He explained that someone asked if it was my dad by his name, and when he said yes, they hung up. He tried to call back, but the line was disconnected. He looked it up and saw it was the number of the police station of the town I lived in. He lived in a different city in a different part of the state. We still have no explanation as to how they knew his name or what happened. Story 10. Not me, but my dad. When I was younger, my biological mom and her husband kidnapped me and took off to another state. My dad said that he was finally starting to accept that he may never see me again after nearly a year of searching, and then one day when he was on a walk, this little girl came up to him and asked, "Are you looking for a little girl?" He looked at her, confused, and she just turned around and pointed up the block at a group of kids playing and said, "She's right there." He walked closer, past the girl, to try to get a better look and saw me in the group. He turned around to figure out what the little girl's deal was, and she was just gone, without a trace. Turns out my bio mom and her husband had come back to visit family for whatever reason. I used to call BS because the story is just so insane, but throughout the years, it's the one story of my dad's that never changed. Not one detail. He's told it so many times that I can recite it word for word, and he's always so awestruck when he tells it, like I can almost see him racking his brain, searching for the most logical explanation. I was 2-3 when it happened, and I'm now 26. He still can't piece it all together to this day. Story 11. I remember her being gone for a little while and later found out she was in jail for that period. My whole childhood is pretty fuzzy, but I heard something about her getting caught in a stolen car with a good amount of booger sugar on her. If the car was stolen as a means to flee, or if it's even connected at all, TBH. My dad and I share a mutual distaste of any conversation involving her, other than his getting me back story, so I just left it at that LOL. Story 12. I've been the little girl in the situation. I can't explain her knowing his son was there, but I do believe that some people broadcast. I've had 2 experiences about this. One time when I was a teenager, I was having a little interaction with a stranger, an adult man. I was with a friend and we were getting directions home from a city we weren't familiar with. This was before cell phones, when people used to ask strangers for directions sometimes. Our eyes met and I felt this knowledge that he was at odds with his wife and in danger of the marriage ending. They were living separately and it had just happened recently. He was devastated. I felt an overpowering urge to tell him that he had to go to her and calmly explain himself fully and honestly and have a completely open conversation with her. I was a shy AF, awkward teenager and he was a grown man and a stranger. So I didn't have the nerve to actually say anything. But a kid might not have that conditioning / be painfully shy the way I was. I don't think I have any sort of special ability or anything like that. I think it was him, because it happened another time, but something very lighthearted. A group was having a guess the number of jelly beans in this jar and win it contest. The young lady manning the booth at the time I passed by was strongly encouraging me to enter, for fun. I don't even like jelly beans, so I was declining, but she was really enthusiastically trying to convince me, and the entire time she was talking, I had the number in my head. It felt like she knew there were 174, or whatever, and so that knowledge was just sitting in her head and in between the two of us. I didn't want to be a party pooper and let her down, so I wrote down that number. I won. I had guessed exactly right. I do not have luck like that, and I don't walk around thinking as though I have access to people's inner thoughts and feelings. But those 2 experiences felt very real and sincere. So yeah, story 13. When I was 19 or 20 and first living on my own, I woke up in the middle of the night once to a pitch black room, but realized I could see as if everything in my room was subtly outlined in a reddish glow. I closed my eyes and could still see the exact same thing. I then covered my eyes with my hands, but could still see. I even got up and tested it by walking around my house with my eyes closed and was able to navigate around all obstacles and even see things like cups on the counters and able to pick them up without missing them. After a little bit of this, I turned on the light to confirm everything was where it was, and when I turned the lights back off, the effect was gone. Overall, it lasted about 10 minutes and has never happened again. My best guess is that I was still half dreaming and my brain was just able to very accurately represent my memory of where everything was. But even if that's the case, I'm very impressed with my brain's half-asleep ability to form a full 3D representation of my environment as I'm moving and manipulating small objects. Either that, or I discovered a latent superpower. Story 14. It's uncommonly known, but you only actually see well in the center of your field of vision. Your brain fills in the missing information so you see the entire picture. Try driving, stay in your lane, and don't look in the rear view mirror. In fact, make it a point to cover it with your hand for a moment while the advancing car can't be seen as it approaches. Then see if you can tell the color of the car passing you as soon as it appears in your peripheral vision. You will be aware of the car, but for that split second before it gets closer to your center field of vision, you won't be able to tell what color it is. That's because color is only registered by the cones, which are only in the middle of your retina. The same thing is quite likely why so many people can walk around in pitch black darkness in their house without walking into anything. Their mind can visualize what the rooms look like because they have walked through the room before, so they know to the inch just where everything is. The mind is a powerful thing. Story 15. 3:30 a.m. My buddy and I spent the night repoing cars. We pull up to the light in Manchester, NJ of 527 and 70. Going straight. In the left turn lane, getting onto 70 East, a blue 97 to 98 Honda CR-V. The person driving had no face, just blank. Like the green man from Always Sunny or No Face from D. Tracy. My buddy and I both saw it. Nobody believed it. Story 16. I fly helicopters for a living. I was working on a power line one year and was going back to our landing zone and noticed an opening in the trees what appeared to be a leg. I came back and tried to get as low as I could into the clearing, thinking it was a person. It was a full-grown cow that had been completely skinned. There were no farms around and the animal didn't appear to be cut up in any way. I went back to the landing zone, picked up one of my ground crew members, and flew back with him just so he could verify that I wasn't crazy. The flight back, we were both kind of in awe because we have no idea how that animal got to where it's at. Even more so that it had no skin on its entire body. It looked like a perfect cow sans skin. Story 17. Was talking on the phone to my dad in the garden about 15 years ago. Saw an orange light slowly come up over some trees behind my house, then take off straight up at a ridiculous speed. Stood there in silence, and so did he. Explained to him what I'd just seen, and he said he'd just seen the exact same thing. He was over 100 miles away in Manchester at the time. Story 18. I was walking along a park sidewalk blowing off grass clippings. Got under some pine trees and through a break in the canopy an 8 to 10 pound rock came tumbling out of the sky, bounced and chipped the sidewalk and rolled down into a creek. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. Story 19. In my old townhouse, the bedrooms had L-shaped door handles. I lived alone and it was a 2-story townhouse with the bedrooms upstairs. Had multiple nights where I'd be laying in bed watching YouTube videos on my iPad when my door handle would twist and the door would slowly open. The first time, I thought someone broke in. Each subsequent time, I'd go through the townhouse and no one was there. The hallway light, which was also the stair light, had a switch at the bottom of the stairs and top that controlled the same light. Multiple times while in bed, the light would turn on. So I'd get up, do a search of the entire townhouse. Nothing there. Then the TV would turn on in the living room at some point, and I'd wake up and walk downstairs to the TV being on. This went on for months and I eventually moved. Nothing like this occurs in my current apartment, but could never explain what was happening. Story 20. I think I was 14 at the time, living in a nice part of a very busy city. I woke up, had breakfast, and waited for my parents to come downstairs. They didn't come. I looked for them but couldn't find them, couldn't find my sisters either. I went outside and there was no one. Literally 0 people in an incredibly busy area on a weekend. I panicked fully. I looked everywhere for people, but they just weren't there. I fully freaked out thinking everyone disappeared. I even checked if there was something on TV about. There was live TV with people, so I calmed a bit. Other people still existed. I think it was around afternoon when I stopped looking around and walked home. When I got home, my parents and sister were luckily there. They insisted they were in and around the house all day, and I even saw them at breakfast. I broke down crying because it was simply not true. To this day, I swear people disappeared for half a day. After my breakdown, we went for ice cream and my city was busy again, hundreds of people doing their thing. I have no clue what the duck happened, but I feel gaslighted by life. Story 21. I was 10 years old maybe, and I lived in quarters. Top floor in the middle of the complex, so I could see every other quarter, and not only that, my voice would echo too. So one evening I woke at dusk hours and found that my room was dark. Barely any light was entering. My mom and I sleep at afternoon, but I couldn't find her near me. Checked other rooms, they were dark too. She wasn't anywhere. The lights were off in the whole complex. Just a red, orange, yellow sky. I was freaked out that I was alone at home and dark. I wanted to run out of that house, but the main door was locked, which freaked me out even more. I was so confused. I looked outside from the balcony. There was no one outside. That dusk hour and warm breeze made the whole scene so deserted that I have never felt that left alone ever. The whole complex looked so scary. There was a field in front of my quarter, but that specific day no one had come to play. I mean, elders may remain at home, but at that hour no child will not be at the field. I started screaming out my mom. Turned out she had locked me and had gone downstairs to another auntie's home. After she came out, everything else started settling down normal. Some kid cycling, an old person is walking. I still feel like that sometimes when I wake up at dusk time. Story 22. I was staying the night with a cousin on his ranch, and in his front yard there was a basketball hoop on a homemade wall like concrete bricks stacked upwards. And we both to this day swear on God we saw what looked like an 8-foot-tall coyote standing up against the wall tugging on the hoop. We closed the blinds quick, and that was the night we established the existence of the ranch's very own cryptid. I think we called it like Doom Dog or some crap. We were 9 to 10. Story 23. When I was 18 years old, I was driving home from a friend's house with another friend. We were on the highway doing about 110 kilometers per hour, 70 miles per hour, and made this trip often. It's a big highway between two towns, so just fields either side. Something on two legs ran alongside my car. I saw it in the rearview mirror and out my side window. It was not a kangaroo, it was human-like. Had long arms and obviously extremely fast. My friend saw it too, and then it just went off the road back into the grass. Neither of us could explain it. Story 24. My friend told me about something like that, but it was really unnervingly slow. Said he was out riding his ATV in the mountains with his dad one night, when all of a sudden his ATV just came to a sudden halt for no reason. He was looking down trying to figure out what was going on when something out of the corner of his eye got his attention, and when he looked up there was something like a tall, he said it had to be at least 6 feet 3 inches, lanky coyote with disgusting long arms walking slowly across the path in front of him, twitching its head in random directions and breathing heavy. He told me that it never once looked in his direction while it was walking, despite his bright headlights beaming at it and its head twitching everywhere. It just kept awkwardly dragging itself across the road until it reached some brush on the other side, and it slowly knelt down and disappeared. He's not really a nonsense, so I know he wasn't just making up things to spook people. He to this day still says it's the single scariest thing he's ever seen. Story 25. I read a story like this in one of those weird US state books, maybe Pennsylvania Weird. The person said they were driving home late one night on a back road with forest on either side. They saw something big on the side of the road, so they slowed down. Across the street strolled this huge animal, black and white, maybe like a cow. It started out on 4 legs, then halfway across the road it stood up, walking on 2 legs with long arms. It disappeared into the forest on the other side of the road. The next morning the person went back to investigate with friends, and all the branches in the animal's path had been broken below 6 feet. I had nightmares for weeks. Story 26. A tree fell in front of us while we were driving. It almost killed us. Moments later, a group of men dressed in nice clothes just happened to have chainsaws in their car that was black and black tinted windows. They started cutting up the tree. We quickly turned around and said nope. I tried to tell myself that it was just Mormons who happened to have chainsaws in the back of their car. I called my mom the other day to see if she still remembers that incident, and she does. Story 27. In this guy. Early morning on a Saturday. I'm on my way to my buddy's place to go to a shooting competition. Wearing pretty military looking attire and a 3-day backpack. Walking through town. It's all empty and deserted. As I'm crossing a road, a young woman comes riding her bike. From the looks of it, a ride of shame, nice dress, a bit of messed up hair. Just as she's passing me, she does something and loses her balance and goes down hard, hits her head, and somehow gets one leg stuck in the frame of her bike. She's a complete mess, bleeding from her head, elbow, and knee. I spring into action, kneeling down next to her and talking calmly get her untangled from the bike. I open up my backpack and get my first aid kit out, clean her wounds, put Band-Aid in the minor stuff and a bandage on the gash in her head. Her dress is bloody and she's sobbing quietly. Clean her up with baby wipes and tell her to go to the hospital and have her head checked out. She agrees. I pack my stuff up and move out. I wonder if it's a story she tells people. The bearded tactical-looking dude that came out of nowhere, patched her up and disappeared. Story 28. I, 13 at the time, was about to go to bed. I was brushing my teeth in front of my bedroom window, staring into the dark, when I suddenly heard someone screaming outside. I stopped brushing so I could hear it better. Someone was screaming out my name. I sort of froze and kept listening. More voices joined, all screaming my name and laughing loudly. It was kind of like an audience at a sports game. It went on for about 5 minutes. When it stopped, I, in shock, went downstairs to my parents to ask them if they'd heard anything. It was impossible not to hear as it was very loud. They had not heard anything. I assume it was some sort of a hallucination. Still feel weird when I'm alone in my room late at night. Story 29. My mom passed away in February 2021 in Missouri. I live in Florida. I flew up there for the funeral with my husband and daughter, stayed for a couple of days to handle her belongings, and then came home. Life goes on. I grieved. About a month, maybe 2, later, I'm lying in my bed in the morning, but I'm wide awake. My phone rings and I answer it. It says Mom on the caller ID. When I click it on, I can clear as day hear her voice. Well, H.I. there. Chuckle, did I wake you up? Now I'm just sitting there, upright on my bed. All I can think to say is, Mom? And as soon as I said that, the phone clicked a couple of times and then went dead. It did show on the caller history that her phone had called mine. Either her BF or my brother kept her phone for whatever reasons, but they wouldn't have done a prank like that. I did try to call the phone back, but it went straight to her voicemail. Story 30. Probably will get lost in the comments. I used to work as trauma cleanup, and out of all the screwed up things I saw, there was one that bothered my coworker and I at the time and makes myself scratch my head still. This goes into a little bit of detail recalling suicide, so reader discretion is advised. We got a call one afternoon. You usually get a small accompanying description from a relative, a friend, a neighbor, just someone with secondary relations to who passed away rather than primary, especially in gruesome or otherwise sudden passings. So it was the neighbors that called on this one. Person who passed was a man verging into his 40s. An ex-veteran leaving behind his wife and younger than a teenager son. At least that's what we gathered from photos or portraits that were in the contaminated area. Story was that he had taken his wife and son to the movies following a wonderful dinner they had. Arrived home, he asked his wife to get his son to bed, and in that time took his shotgun and did himself in the entry from his garage to his kitchen. No clue why anyone would do anything like that. Even having seen a lot and having some trauma of my own that I carry, and while I know everyone's pain and experiences are different, I couldn't fathom letting my partner go read my kid a story or making sure he brushes his teeth or whatever and blowing my brains out in that same period of time in the same house, directly downstairs from them. Anyway, not the point, unfortunately. The point is that they needed help as the wife was inconsolable. Police had already arrived and did their investigation, and the neighbors were given the green from the wife to call whomever to handle it because, obviously, they couldn't and shouldn't be in the home after that until things got cleaned up and looking better, and until they've had time to go through their own grieving and such. So we get there and the contaminated area is like I described, but rather than like an entry, it's like a pantry. You have a garage with a door, that leads through that door into a pantry that has 2 doors that leads from that second door into the house. And word is, and from the most affected area that we could see, he was in the pantry when it happened. Why this is all strange and makes me guess that a lot of what could have instead transpired there is because there is splash, a term that we'd use to signify an area where, through kinetic force, a fair amount of the contamination can be on the walls and ceiling, in the garage, pantry, and house interior. Having splash on multiple surfaces is fair and is seen a lot, but having it across 3 rooms, all separated by doors, with it also being on both sides of the doors, and a good amount of contaminants in the home and 3 feet around a corner, it's made me question what went on there and if it really was a man dealing with his trauma by ending it or something else altogether. Never spoke to the wife or went looking for an official police statement. It's better for your mental health if you try and keep yourself as separated as possible from the situation. But my coworker and I would talk about previous jobs, sometimes by nicknames we'd give them, and we'd recall that one under the name Houdini. I just don't know how, even with the spread buckshot puts out, you could get yourself across that many rooms and surfaces with one shot. It was either magic or the most terrible trick someone has ever pulled. Story 31. I worked as an underbutler in a large Scottish castle in the early 2000s. One night, I was the only person in the house and decided to throw a load of laundry in before bed. I walked down to service hallway, into the ironing room, and from there to the washing machine room. I got my laundry in and then started to leave. I turned the lights off in the washing machine room and suddenly everything was black. The lights weren't on in the ironing room. My first thought was it's weird that I didn't turn the lights on in here when I came in, but they aren't on, so obviously I didn't. The ironing room had huge ironing tables the size of snooker tables, and as I started to walk through, I kept bumping into them. After a couple of times of bumping into them, I was suddenly filled with a terrible, accompanied, watched, spine-tingling feeling that something was there and not to look toward the sewing room, another room that came off the ironing room. I fumbled my way through the ironing room, back to the service hall in a panic. The hall lights were on and everything was fine. That is the whole story. I didn't see anything. However, there are some problems. To this day, I am confident that I turned the lights on in the ironing room when I went in. It wasn't possible to move through the room without bumping into things a bunch of times, as my exit demonstrated. The light in the ironing room was controlled by a very large switch that made a loud clicking noise. I didn't hear it click off when I was in the washing room. In the days that followed, the family and the butler returned home, and I had forgotten about the entire incident. A week or so later, I suddenly remembered it happening and said to the butler, "I've never heard of any ghost stories at the castle. Are there any?" He kind of dismissively said, "Oh, they say there's a white lady in the ballroom, and, room name redacted, is apparently haunted, but that's it. Oh, and they say the sewing room is haunted." I kind of gasped and told the butler the story. He seemed fascinated. He told the family, and a couple of them agreed that the laundry room was unsettling. I don't believe in ghosts, and think it was likely an unfortunately timed electrical fault and an overactive imagination. Still, I'll never forget how sudden and strong the feeling of a presence was when I was fumbling my way out of the ironing room. Story 32. I was standing on the seaside walkway with a bunch of other people watching the sunset. A red orb came speeding down the coastline at like 50-150 m altitude. Didn't think much of it until it instantly stopped and speeded back the way it came until it was out of sight. No noise, too low for a plane or helicopter, and wasn't a flare because it was flying fast, stopped instantly, and then flew back the way it came. Several people saw it, but this was before mobile phones with cameras were a mainstream thing. Story 33. When I was about 21 years old, almost a decade ago, I went to go open the garage to take out the trash since the trash was on that side of the yard. As soon as the garage opens and I look into the sky, I see this red thing that kind of turned green. It was just sitting there in the sky, not moving, almost like it was just staring at me. I completely froze, dropped the trash from my hands, then it flew off with this green trail after it. The trail disappeared in a couple seconds. I remember then I ran inside panicking and not being able to catch my breath. My siblings all ran to me to ask what happened. And unfortunately, they did not believe me, even though I'm known not to lie. Thank you for sharing this. It reassures me that I was seeing things. Story 34. One night, years after high school and I'd gotten married, I had a vivid and very sad dream about the first boyfriend I ever really loved. We were 15 and 16, broke up about 3 years later because he really got into drugs. I had this dream maybe 9 years after that. I dreamed I was walking down a crowded sidewalk in some big city and I'd bumped into him going the direction I just came from. He was crying and he asked me for help. I can't remember if the dream changed then or I woke up, but it was just that little snippet of seeing his face. It was so clear. I still remember how his beautiful blue eyes looked. I don't know why I waited a couple more years to call his mother and ask about him one day when I recalled that dream for some reason. But I did call her. It turns out he had died in a freak accident around the time I had that dream. He had a car in his garage that he was working on. He had climbed on the hood for some reason, to do something, and he fell. Broke his neck and it was fatal. Now I'm always sad and a little creeped out every time I think of that dream. Probably always will be. Story 35. My family tells a story about my sister from a few years before I was born. The story goes that my parents were woken in the middle of the night hearing my sister talking in her bedroom. They peeked in and saw her asleep, so just figured that she was talking in her sleep. They heard it a few more times, so asked her about it in the morning. She told a story about our Uncle Elmer, who was a fighter pilot in the USAF. She said he was sitting in the chair next to her bed in his flight suit and they were just having a normal conversation and catching up on just normal life stuff. A day or two later, they got notice that he had crashed in the middle of the Indian Ocean and was considered Kia. Story 36. I had something in a similar vein happen. When I would sleep over at my grandparents', my grandma worked in a bakery and would be gone by the time I would wake up, but my grandpa would make me cereal and make himself coffee while I sat at the counter. I had a dream one night that I was standing where my grandpa would have, and he was sitting where I would on the bar stool. He told me he had passed on. When I woke up, I was very sad, but recovered knowing it was only a dream. Later that day, my grandpa was fine, but his father, my great-grandfather, had passed away overnight. Something about being in a different spot in my dream always made it feel like that message was meant for my grandpa or uncle, but accidentally went to me. Story 37. 2 missing hours. I posted about it on another account. Setup. I used to be a home health aide for the disabled/elderly. I stayed overnights to help them get up, use the restroom, change, clean them, etc. I used to take care of a man named Mr. M. We kept an old large clock alarm that chimed every hour. Every 2 hours we'd roll Mr. M over and change his pads. We recorded everything that happened in a notebook by the clock. Story. It was a usual day until around 2 a.m. I heard the chimes ring twice, wrote down that I was going in, then went in, wrote what I did, changed his pads, wrote the time I got done, then went back to the kitchen where I sat every night, having my laptop set up to pass the time. About 15 minutes pass, and I hear the clock chime again. 4 times. I look at my computer, thinking the clock was wrong, and no. 4 a.m. I look at the notes, no new notes. I write that I'm going and I go in to change Mr. M's pads. I walk in, and he looks at me and asks, "Weren't you just in here?" I said yeah, then went with changing his pads. They were dry, a rarity. I still have no idea what happened to those 2 hours. It was like 2 hours passed in 15 minutes. And 3 o'clock was skipped completely. I was watching a YouTube series at the time, and my video would have ended in that 2 hours. I have no idea to this day what happened. To those suggesting a time change/DST, this happened December 11th, 2016. Story 36. I was in Ghana, West Africa, and two people were arguing about family land or something like that. One of them removed his pants, sat down on his bare ass and said, "If I'm lying, may I be struck by lightning," and he was immediately stricken by lightning. We all started running. I guess he was lying. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever witnessed. When I came back home, I researched into African occult and beliefs, but I still don't know or understand what that was. Crap still gives me nightmares. Story 37. I live outside city limits. There are very few houses near my home and many tall bushes and trees around the house. There is a small mountain at some distance. The nights are very quiet and there is no street lights, so after dark the only lights are the lights from my house and the moonlight. There are two trees a little far from my house that are standing close to one another. One night while I was outside my house with a flashlight doing something, I realized there was only one of those trees. I looked around that tree with my flashlight, but there was no sign of the other tree, like it never existed. The next day I went there during daytime to see exactly what happened to the other tree, and they both were there just like I remembered. I looked around them and even climbed on them to see anything strange, but nothing was out of ordinary. Story 38. Short version, 14 years old, pretending to sleep at a friend's house and instead walking around the city, Colorado Springs, Colorado, at around 3 a.m., and suddenly for about 2 to 3 minutes it's bright as day across the whole city. I could clearly see mountains probably 5 miles away. And then poof, back to dark. There was no obvious source of the light. That was around 35 years ago. Still have no clue what it was. Edit. Surprised this post got any attention, also amazed at how many others had very similar experiences. Agree with the feedback suggesting a meteorite is the most likely explanation. It was not a cloudy night, so I think electrical ground source bouncing off clouds is less likely. Those suggesting iridium satellites, this was mid to late 80s, so I don't think they launched yet. And yeah, there's a ton of military stuff in the area, NORAD, the Air Force Academy, Peterson AFB, and I think a few others were mentioned. I think these are less likely than a meteorite because of how far up and down the mountain range I could see. Also, folks mentioning a meteorite probably wouldn't last 2 to 3 minutes. I think my time perception could be off. I froze up and just stared at the basin of the city and the very prominent mountains for however long it was. It felt like a few minutes, but maybe it wasn't. The odd thing with any explanation is that the light source was clearly on my side of the Rocky Mountains. The whole front range was visible, so the source seems like it had to be from above. Yet I couldn't see any point of light in the sky where intuition says it had to be. Still, I suppose there have been nestled behind some geography that blocked my view but didn't block it casting light on the basin of the city/mountain range. That seems plausible. Story 39. This incident happened to me when I was 10 years old. My friend and I were cycling. It was around 7:15 and it had gotten dark. There was a road where we usually cycled, but it was a dead end. There were bushes on one side and a wall with barbed wires. At the end of the road, there was a residential complex on the right side, and a small route led to the farms. The middle part of the road was all quiet and dark. My friend and I were just chatting and cycling when I heard a sound. I don't remember it well, but it seemed like a little girl weeping. Just as I was about to ask my friend, "Hey, did you hear that?" he shouted, "Run." When we reached the other side of the road where the residential complex was, I asked him, "What the heck, bro? What happened?" He was shivering in fear and said he saw a woman in the bushes with a big white eye. When some people appeared on the road, we quickly left. We were shivering with fear, and to this day, we don't know how to explain it. Story 40. When I was at university in my second year, we lived in a terraced house. I have a history of vivid/lucid dreams and had just recently at this time experienced a couple episodes of sleep paralysis.
One night I wake up, I think, anyway, and I remember staring at the doorway completely frozen and seeing the shadows of two men there. They were whispering about taking me and discussing whether I was asleep. I remember hearing SHHHH, go back to sleep. It was completely fuzzy and dark, and I was in that very much blurred reality stage of not being able to tell if I was awake properly or not. I couldn't move at all, and chalked it up to sleep paralysis and went back to sleep. I wouldn't have thought twice about it except the police knocked on our door that afternoon. I wasn't in. My housemates told me, and said our neighbor had had their house broken into that same night. The real kicker is that at the time our front door lock was broken, anyone could have come in and left without us knowing. To this day, I will truly never know if it was a coincidentally bad day to have a nightmare, or a lucky escape. ETA, I'm pretty sure it was a dream. If there hadn't been the burglary the same night, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. The only other thing I wondered at the time was our housemate had a habit of not closing the broken front door properly. So 2 to 3 times a week at that time, if you got up in the middle of the night, the front door would be swinging wide open. Trust me, we were very annoyed at him for this, ha ha ha. I wondered if the people who had broken in next door had happened to see our door open and figured they'd have a look and decided there was nothing in our ratty student house worth taking. And that some part of this had combined with my weird dream state to mix up some dream and some reality. It is also worth saying that I am an exceptionally light sleeper and woke up constantly in the night at this time in my life. Overall, I still think that dream is the most likely scenario, but truth is I will never know for sure, and I figure the end result is the same either way ultimately. Super interesting hearing other stories of similar experiences too. Story 41. When I was about 16, I was at a sleepover LAN party with some kids from my school. They were more of the sporty types. Sort of friends, but more so acquaintances. One of them wanted to go to the store and I went with them. It was night, probably 9 or 10 p.m. This was in a very small town in New England, by the way. Anyway, we're driving, and this monkey cat-looking creature just hops out of the woods and lands right in front of the car. We just stopped and froze, then it hopped into the other side. And this was 2 total hops. Thing went far. We spent the rest of the night trying to figure out what animal that was. Anyone know? I was thinking about that the other day, but I never really talked to the kid in the first place and haven't seen him since high school. And it had a really long tail. Thinking back, more like the head of a cat and the body of a monkey. It wasn't very large, but definitely not small. Light brown. Story 42. As a kid on rainy days, I would grab my umbrella and jacket and play around in the rain, collecting raindrops. When I was about 11, I was playing outside in my front yard one day. I decided to go into the sidewalk to catch a bit more rain. I then looked into the street. It was a foggy, rainy day, but I could have sworn I saw someone who looked exactly like me. Me being a kid, I panicked, ran inside for the rest of the rain, but I was still an idiot, so I never really told anyone, because I thought that they wouldn't believe me. And it, holy guacamole, didn't know others had the same experience as me. Also, to clarify more, they didn't copy my movements like a mirror. Yes, we were both standing in the same height, but when I was running and turned around for a moment, they didn't really seem to move. They just stood there staring. Story 43. It was back in my family house while visiting. I was about to go to sleep, and while looking at my phone, I heard it. Breathing from my slightly open window. Slow ins and outs. I kept lying in my bed listening to it for about 5 minutes, thinking about what is happening. If I remember correctly, I had my blinds shut, so looking directly was not an option, and the idea of opening them terrified me. I finally managed to convince myself, and there is nothing. But the sound keeps on coming. It was dark, so I couldn't see a lot, but I had the feeling that the source of breath was beneath the window, outside of my field of view. So I decided to go outside. I took some kind of budget mace found in the kitchen and a big survival torch. As soon as I opened the doors, I heard it. It was dogs barking really from far away. I quickly recognized the pattern and went back inside. Yep, it was these barks that scared the crap out of me. I don't know why it sounded slightly different inside and why these crap were barking rhythmically non-stop for around 15 minutes. Story 44. My friend and I repeated the same miles on a road once with no noticeable interruption. like 10 minutes apart. We were completely sober and driving back to the town we went to college in. You know when you make a drive a ton and know all the road signs and kind of subconsciously check them off as you go by? Well, just after you drive through one town on our way back, there is a sign that says X in 29 miles. I saw that sign and my friend and I were talking, but then it felt like we had driven another 10 minutes or so at least, and we went by the same sign again. It freaked me out, and I remember butting into whatever conversation we were having and asking how long it had been since we had driven through the last town, and then he got a real weird look on his face too as he realized we were literally still 29 miles away, and just outside of the town we thought we had left 10 to 15 minutes earlier. And we were on the interstate. There's no way we could have just got turned around. No idea how to explain it to this day. I'm just glad someone else experienced it with me, lol. Story 45. I don't know how to put this, but there was a period of time when I would get home from work late at night. During this time, I get out of my vehicle and head towards the front door, obviously. But without fail, nearly every night, I would look up at the stars without really knowing why. I would look at the moon for a long while with no thoughts in my head. Eventually, I noticed a bright white light every night at the same spot in the sky. A bright star? Probably. A distant planet? Could be. So during my little stargazing routine, I'd look for that bright star. One night it was gone. And ever since then I stopped feeling entranced by the night sky. Sometimes I miss that light in the sky, but most of the time I don't think of it. Never did find out what it may have been. Story 46. Image the situation. Me, a 13 years old girl walking with my dog in fresh snow. Really fresh 5 centimeters of snow. No one was around. I see big, really big, black dog. I look at my dog. My dog is terrified and trying to get home. We run home. I wait for 10 minutes and go check that dog. I was stupid, yes. There are no dog footprints. None at all. On fresh snow. Only footprints of me and my dog. I checked all area, nope, nothing. It wasn't a hallucination. My dog nearly peed when he saw that black giant dog. Story 47. I once showed Harrison Ford a card to see if he wanted to upgrade from his current one. I asked him what he was looking for. He gave me nothing but useless one-word responses. He told me, I seem to have made you run a fool's errand, and walked away toward his car. I had a screwed moment and said in a stern voice, well, how long have you had that one? Referring to his current car. He stopped, turned around, and walked back to the car I was sitting in, leaned into the passenger side with one hand on the seat, and took off his glasses to reveal a surprised, almost worried face as he said, 3 years, why? I then realized as I was looking into the eyes of Han Solo from no more than 2 feet away and redirected my head to the steering wheel to talk nonsense about new button features. The part one don't understand is, when I looked back, he gave a smirk, almost a smile, as he slowly moved his sunglasses back over his eyes and turned around to his car without saying a word. I don't think I'll ever know if he smiled because he succeeded in flexing his fame by merely staring me in the eyes to make me nervous, or because for a second he thought I was actually able to help him without treating him differently for being famous, but got noticeably nervous and messed it up. It keeps me up sometimes. Story 48. I've seen some stuff before, ghosty stuff, UFO stuff, that sort of thing. But the downright oddest thing was much smaller and still baffles me. A bunch of years back I was cooking at a bar. It was a solo kitchen shift with just a bartender and me for the whole night. When I closed my kitchen, I would wrap up all the unused food with plastic wrap from a large heavy-duty roll of the stuff much bigger than you would buy for your kitchen at home. Now the roll itself was about 1.5 feet long and about 5 inches wide and made of a heavy-duty tack of cardboard which was held and placed inside its box by plastic braces on either end. These braces effectively plugged both sides of the cardboard tube. One particular night I ran out of plastic and, After putting all food away and cleaning and turning everything off, I went to break down the empty plastic roll and box and such. No sooner had I pulled the tube out of the box, plastic braces still on, and set it aside, I began to hear a rattling inside the tube. Think about shaking a jar with a few beans in it, but cardboard and sitting perfectly still. I immediately thought it could only be some kind of agitated bug like a roach or something. We had never had any kind of infestation in that establishment, and I would never allow such things in my kitchen, but that was all I could think it could be. I then very carefully removed the bracers to check inside the tube, which was completely empty. Very confused, but brushing it off, I put the bracers back on and prepared to get the last of my trash together when I heard the rattling again. I knew the tube was empty, but there it was rattling like jumping beans on meth. I again carefully opened it all the way and set down the tube and two bracers. Nothing. I put the bracers back on and set it down. Instant rattling. I called the bartender over and showed him. He immediately said, "There better not be a bug in there," so I very slowly opened it back up in front of him, still completely empty, and then put it back together and the rattling continued. In the end, all we could do was shrug it off and chalk it up to a big who knows. Story 49. I was 7 or 8 years old. My mom had put me to bed and went to my sister's room to do the same for her. I was tucked in with my head on my two pillows. Both my hands were wrapped up in the blankets because it was a cold night and we didn't have too much money to heat the home. Then, without warning, one of the pillows flew out from under my head toward the wall with an insane force, as if someone had violently pulled it out from under me. I turned over and there was nobody there. There's no way someone could have pushed it, and I was facing the direction it would have been pulled from. I ran to my sister's room to hug my mom and ask her what on earth happened. She dismissed it and told me to go back to bed. Naturally, I stayed up the whole rest of the night, LOL. I still can't work out the physics of what happened to this day. Story 50. My ex-boyfriend is a diagnosed schizophrenic, and he often told me about the things/people he saw and heard. One summer, on several late nights, he kept seeing a big, dark creature in the middle of the road on the way to drop me off home. He'd stop the car in a panic and wake me up. I'd always fall asleep on the way home and tried to get me to see this creature. I never saw anything, so I told him it was probably his schizophrenia. Well, on one night I stayed awake on the drive home and I saw the creature in the road. It had the body of a huge bear, long horse-like legs. It didn't seem to have a neck. It was blacker than night and had a glowing white Cheshire grin. I said, "What is that?" And my boyfriend said, "See, I've been trying to tell you." We watched it cross the road and disappear in thin air. That was the last time he and I ever saw the thing. This was about 10 years ago. Story 51. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was the spring of 1998 when I was 14. My Boy Scout troop went hiking in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee, and the boys in my troop were people I'd known my whole life, and we were all very close and knew each other very well and trusted each other. We'd been hiking for 5 days or so, and it was miserable. It rained every day, and we were all exhausted and sore and hungry and covered with blisters. The adults realized we'd bitten off more than we could chew in trying to hike a 60-mile trail, especially with the awful weather, so we'd changed course and gotten off the trail to spend the night in a drive-in campground. The kind of place with hookups for RVs and picnic tables and fire pits/grills and a central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area far from a town or a house. There may have been a few other small groups there, but if there were, we never interacted with or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet and thus very excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark and we'd finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends, including my friend Jeremy, who, like everyone else in our group, I had known since we were babies, headed up to the bathhouse, which was maybe a quarter-mile walk through the pitch-dark woods up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up, and after 10 or 15 minutes followed them by myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old incandescent kind, pre-LED. I remember the woods were totally silent. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light from it off in the distance through the woods. I heard a noise to my left and I looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old school manual water pump about 20 feet off the trail. The kind of pump where you raise and lower a handle to pump water up from a well. There was a strange light around him like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there by himself in the woods off the trail. I asked him if he was already done with his shower. He seemed kind of sad and he said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said okay and didn't think much of it until I got to the bathhouse.
When I walked in the door, my friends were all in there and I heard Jeremy talking from in the shower. All the blood drained out of my head and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were freaked out and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them what had happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot. This was long before any of us had experimented with any mind-altering substances, but I could tell they believed me. Like I said, we'd known each other forever and knew when one of us was exaggerating or playing a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth and whatnot, and then walked back together in total silence. When we got to the spot I had seen, however, he was gone without a trace. The water pump was there though. No one had noticed it before because it was a ways off the trail and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite and went to bed freaked out. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all the years since then, I've never been able to figure out what happened. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend? Unlikely. Did I hallucinate it? Also unlikely. Who's to say? Story 52. I was visiting home, and my mom, my dad, and I decided to go to my maternal grandfather's grave to pay our respects. We have a tradition where for the first 10 years after a person's death, a cross has to stay over their grave, otherwise the person might have a hard time crossing to whatever place comes after you die. He's been dead for 7 years, so my dad checked that the cross was sturdy and didn't need to be propped up or anything. We all checked it. It was definitely not going anywhere. About a week later, we had a windstorm, and after that, I started waking up in the middle of the night because I felt like someone was shaking me awake. This kept up for almost 2 weeks before I had a dream that my grandfather was sitting on the edge of my bed and he asked me to go to his grave and fix the cross because it had fallen. I told my parents about this and we all had a laugh about it. The dreams kept up though, at a disconcerting frequency because I was starting to be exhausted all the time from a lack of sleep. My dad and I, on a whim, went back to my grandfather's grave. Lo and behold, the cross had been knocked down. Gatekeeper said it probably got knocked down in the storm. We picked it up and I stopped seeing my grandfather in my dreams. Story 53. I went to a friend who was a psychic. Yeah, I know. I joked about her skills with her all the time. But when my birth father passed away, I went to her. I had not spoken much about my father, posted about him, nor had she met him. He didn't live nearby. His obituary was simple with bare details, and he did not have an online presence. What she said to me were details no one knew. And I mean details. She said phrases only he would use in anger. She said it in the same tone it was frighteningly eerie. It made me a believer in her. She called me up one evening to speak to my husband. His mother had a message for him. I passed the phone over. I never heard the conversation, but it shook him. He didn't tell me much, but again, things no one knew. I still joke around about her skills, but respectfully. Story 54. There's an old closed down road through a bunch of fields around the corner from my house. Me and my girlfriend were walking the dogs there one night at around 11 p.m. because we wanted to look at the stars. As we passed through the railings at the entrance, we both noticed someone coming out from deep in the bushes to the left of the road, only visible as it was full white and almost reflecting / glowing from head to toe. Even though it was pitch black with no lights anywhere near, that's why we go there to see the stars. At first I assumed it must have been a cyclist as it appeared to be literally gliding up the road, which is a very steep hill, with no movement other than forward, no head bobbing from walking. but at the same time no movement in the legs, and this thing was dead silent. It was close enough to hear if it was a bike. The dogs were barking like crazy, but we just kept walking in silence. I don't know why I assumed we were almost in shock. As it disappeared around the corner, my girlfriend turned to me and said, "Did you just see that?" I replied I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to scare you. We still don't know what it was, but I know for certain it made no sound coming out from the bushes and did not appear to be dragging a bike through. It was just literally gliding or floating. I didn't realize until after that the reason the road was closed was because it was the most deadly road in my town for collisions, so they built a new one and closed it down. Still creeps me out to think about it possibly being someone who lost their life on that road, but I'm still in denial, trying to refuse to believe it. I still tell my girlfriend it must have been a cyclist just so she will still come for walks through there with me, but I know, and so does she, it was not. Story 55. I once saw a rock jump. I was taking Ben's out from my job at a restaurant to the dumpster behind the place, and from the sky falls this rock. It came from the direction of a high, 3-story roof of the building across the road, so I guess it could have somehow come off there, but this thing had some serious momentum. Anyway, it hits the ground and bounces a few times, like rocks do. It's night and I can't really see, but there's enough streetlights and I'm like, WTF. There's no one on the roof. Anyway, the rock bounces a few times, and once it's lost its momentum, it stops. But then it hops. Like a frog. 3 times. It had completely stopped, like a complete standstill, but then it just all of a suddenly bounced. Rinse and repeat 3 times. I went over to inspect, and yes, it was a seemingly normal rock. Was weird.